What's up, everybody? Hope y'all are staying warm out there because I am not staying warm in here. I am absolutely freezing. I want to say close to like actual freezing, 32 Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius for everybody else that doesn't use Fahrenheit, like the entire rest of the world. But either way, really, really cold, trying to keep my feet warm and deciding to do that with some Dimir Shadow, apparently. So I've been kind of like wondering where I wanted to go with Dimir and what I wanted to try out, what I wanted to do differently. And some of the things that came to mind were like, do I want to try cutting Street Wraith? Just add some more like actual spells. Do I want to try Curse Totem? It's a card that Dogfish has been trying recently and giving me some pretty positive feedback on. So, yeah, let's just change up a bunch of it, see what happens. So, ended up throwing together this list. Cut Street Wraith for like the 4th copy of Orcish Bowmaster, the 4th Fatal Push in the main. I've got the 7 cantrips with the 4 Consider, 3 Preordain. I do like Consider a lot more than Preordain. The instant speed is extraordinarily relevant, so don't sell it short. 2 Tishana's Tidebinder, 2 Dismember, then like the 4 Shadow, 3 Murktide. I did go ahead and add the 5th Shock Land with the Steam Vents. The red doesn't matter, but having the extra shock when you've got Shadow but don't have Street Wraith is nice. So I wanted to keep that in there. Couple islands, Fiery Islet, Odawara, blah, 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 blah. Sideboard, a couple extra copies of Dress Down, really good against Hardened Scales. Reasonable into Scam, but I'm getting like less and less on it against Scam. More just want it for Urza's Sagas. 2 Spreading Seas, 2 extra stub to go with the 2 in the main, 2 Stern Scolding, a Flusterstorm, a Bitter Triumph, Chalice of the Void, 2 Engineered Explosives, and the 2 Curse Totems that I said I was going to try out. So let's just go ahead and go over the games, and you can see kind of how everything plays out. See if maybe Dimir's a color combination that you're interested in trying in your future endeavors. And yeah, on to match number 1. Through the power of CGI. There we go. All right. Game number 1. We are on the play. Thoughtseizes, Counterspells, Preordains, oh my. Thoughtseize, and we are up against Tron. So we've got a Sylvan Scrying is their only guaranteed way of getting the 3rd Tron land. They do have the Sphere, but we get to untap with either another Thoughtseize or Counterspell. Decide to go for the Thoughtseize, take a 1 ring, leave them with a Karn and a Ugin the Spirit Dragon. So I can have like turn 2 or turn 3 stub if I need it. Turn 3 soft stub for a 7-drop, or turn 3 counter spell. We just need to try to find a threat. I could have bottomed the Bowmaster. I kind of went for the decision of somebody is better than nobody. Unfortunately, our opponent does rip the 3rd Tron land off the top, or either off the top or off the Sphere, one way or the other. Hit the Tron land, hit the O-Stone, so not looking too great for the home team right here. And you know when your opponent's ripping hot, they're ripping hot. It's just straight into the Ulamog to wreck our day. There we go. So yeah, their draws were 3rd Tron land, O-Stone, Ulamog. Good times. On to game number 2. World's quickest video. Quit mulligan off a no-lander. Sideboarding against Tron. We're boarding out like all the Fatal Pushes, Dismember, stuff like that. Boarding in extra stubs, Spreading Seas, and Dress Down, because Dress Down can like take the Lifelink and Death Touch off a Wormcoil engine. It can buff your Shadow up to a 13/13, which is really nice when you don't have the Street Wraiths. So maybe you need like a Dress Down to get stub online. Thoughtseize away a map and an O-Stone, taking away the guaranteed additional Tron land, as well as like their first significant play they can make. We've got Counterspell for the 1 ring. So I kind of feel like if I get down ahead of them getting their mana developed, then I can just start hitting them in the face, holding up Counterspell. So we got a 7/7 Murktide as a 3-turn clock. Opponent finds a Talisman and Ancient Stirrings for something that isn't a Tron land, so we don't care too much about that. We're just going to start swinging and hitting our opponent in the face. We are going to counter this one ring here. If it was a Karn, I probably would have just like flashed in Bowmaster, ping the Karn, untap, attack them, attack down Karn with the Bowmaster, and held up counterspell for the ring. But since they went ahead and went for the ring, we counterspelled instead because, you know, I like having my opponent like at 0. So on to game 3 against Tron. Pretty good hand. We've got turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Xerox through our deck. Interesting decision here on the Thoughtseize. So I see Ancient Stirrings, Wormcoil Engine is the only eligible targets. Wormcoil Engine, obviously like the bigger threat overall, but Ancient Stirrings is their only way right now of helping them find the Tron land until Urza's Saga gets going and can find a map. Now I'm hoping that between now and Urza's Saga going off, finding a map, cracking the map, getting the Wormcoil online, I'm hoping I can find another copy of Thoughtseize or a Spreading Seeds for the Urza Saga. So I feel like I've got a good bit of outs to that. So taking the Ancient Stirrings kind of cuts back on their ability to get Tron online right off the bat. So Tower that we knew about. We're going to start looping through our deck a little bit, try to find something relevant. And opponent rips 3rd Tron land as one does. Like, you don't play Tron without an innate ability to rip Tron lands off the top. So it happens. Thoughtseize, I could have kept that and gone like Thoughtseize plus Shadow, but I wanted to play Shadow plus Dress Down here so that I could just like get the Wormcoil Engine off the board completely. Opponent has an O-Stone, which kind of messes up my plan here a little bit. What they could have done is just popped O-Stone and taken their tokens, but instead we're going to get to block, Dress Down, trade off Shadow, Dress Down for the Wormcoil Engine, because I'm kind of hoping that I can turn 5, play this Murktide, hold up Tishana's for the O-Stone, and if my opponent just kind of whiffs on anything relevant and just draws like some lands or some stars, spheres, stuff like that, then I might be okay. It's not a perfect plan, but it's the only plan we got, so we're rolling with it. So we are getting down a big chunky Murktide here, holding up Tidebinder again to try to hit this O-Stone whenever they crack it. Decide to go Fate Counter. You got it. We don't care about a construct token that's not flying. And then immediately on their main phase, they go to crack the O-Stone. So we are going to take the opportunity to Tidebinder that activation. Tidebinder has like really, really overperformed as a flex spot. It's usually not doing anything insanely broken or like single-handedly winning any matchups, but it's a really cool tempo swing and almost always has some sort of viability to it. So we've got a Talisman down, Murktide swinging in. We preordained and saw a Stubborn Denial and a Bowmaster. I decided to draw the Bowmaster because I can crack the Fiery Islet to draw into the stub if my opponent plays a non-creature spell that I need to counter here. So I think that they don't have many outs here. Yeah, that 10 mana, that's an out. So Ulamog cast trigger takes out our dudes, and now we have nothing. So games 1 and 3 decided by blind rip 3rd Tron land and an Ulamog. Rough. I could do some teching for Tron, like there's summary dismissal or something in there. You can also Tidebinder to hit the cast trigger on Ulamog. But match number 2. Opponent leads on a Leyline of Anticipation, or Leyline of Abundance, sorry. And we get to Thoughtseize Way, Caryatid, Dismember, Shadow, Halfling. Usually when I see Leyline of Abundance, Sylvan Caryatid, I assume it's something unfair. So my immediate thought here is like Mono Green Devotion. Really good Leyline of Abundance deck. So sideboarding, I'm like, all right, let's cut back on some of the big interaction, kind of like keep our removal up. I don't really know for sure what my opponent's doing. Curse Totem seems like it'd be pretty good against a deck running a whole bunch of mana dorks. So I ended up bringing that in. I don't really have like a defined sideboard plan for Mono Green Devotion. So I'm not really sure if my sideboarding strategy is halfway okay or if it's terrible. I'm just planning on like countering relevant things. Karn, pretty consistent staple out of Mono Green Devotion. So feeling good about that decision at the moment. And yeah, I kind of figured like if I draw more counter spells, that's got to do something. Well, that's a weird one out of Mono Green Devotion. Kaya the Inexonerable, something like that. Regardless, we're going to Tidebinder the Kaya so I can keep Counterspell. It's like I can start attacking into the Kaya, so either they have to chump block, make Drown in the Lock better, or just give up the Kaya, and again, I get to keep holding my Counterspells. I think a lot of times, like, people get kind of antsy with Counterspell and say, oh, I got a target, I got to fire it off, when more often than not, it's like right to not counter the thing if you can afford to not counter the thing, because counterspells are kind of like your stopgap. They're this safety net card that you have access to, and the more you just like throw them around just because you can counter something, the less you have the ability to counter the things that actually matter. So we got to take care of that Kaya just with Tashana's get down Murktide, just kind of hoping that our opponent doesn't have anything too impactful this turn. Turns out they just had a couple 0/4s that we don't really care about, so we're going to push those, swing in. Now we have a Drown in the Lock for 6, which feels a whole lot better than a Drown in the Lock for like 1 or 2. That looks like it can be drowned, so it will be. And easy 2-0. On to match number 3. We are starting off on the play again. Love being on the play. First hand, 1-lander, didn't really work out too well. Second hand, we don't have black mana, but we do just have like land double counter spell. So hopefully that'll buy us some time till we find black mana, or we just find black mana off the top. I don't really know what basic force indicates until they cycle an int. And now we know it's living end. I did have to do a reasonable job of keeping track of my opponent's lands this matchup. You'll see why here momentarily. So they're going to cycle this Troll, get a Blood Crypt, and then proceed to not play the Blood Crypt. And so like this entire time, I'm having to keep up with what lands my opponent has access to. Like here, we're going to play another land that's not the Blood Crypt I knew about. So I don't know if this means force a negation. I'm assuming it does if they're shocking in. They don't know that I've got double counterspell and drown. I haven't seen a grief yet, but they do have double black now, so they could just hard cast a grief. But they're giving all the signs of having force of negation. So if they decide to just go for like an end of turn outburst and I counter and they force and I counter and then they untap and Charlos Agent, nothing I can do about it. Hand didn't really come together the way I would have liked. We were on a mulligan, but drawing the Dismember, the Fatal Push, the Murktide right here. non-fetches. You see where I'm going? So finally play out that Blood Crypt. We could sit here and hold up double counterspell. I don't think it's productive enough to like get us closer to ending the game. I probably should have cast the Thoughtseize right there though. So we could untap if they only had like one cascade effect, or if they had Force Shardless, for example, and didn't have another cascader, then we might be able to disrupt them enough with Thoughtseize to buy a turn, untap, play Murktide, hold up counterspell. So should have just gone ahead and gone in with the Thoughtseize there. I couldn't beat Force anyway, so I shouldn't try to beat Force. I should try to set up for the Murktide. Game 2, sideboarding against Living End, all those like fatal pushes and dismembers and stuff coming out, bringing in things like Flusterstorm, Stubborn Denial. I think I ended up bringing in like a Spreading Seas, yeah, because I just had more that I wanted to take out than I had wanting to bring in. If you are wanting to run a lot of Dimir, Dauthi Voidwalker is a card you can very easily slot into the sideboard. I haven't really found Living End to be popular enough for me to want Dauthi too aggressively, but it's not a bad call by any means. We're going to sit on our counterspells. I also meant to board out Spell Snare and just like completely forgot that I put it in the deck. So I skipped over it thinking it was just another Spell Pierce. And then I drew it and was like, wait, that's not a Spell Pierce at all. Thoughtseize, we see double Violent Outburst. We see 2 Living Ends in hand. So pretty cool choice here. We could Tidebinder the Cascade trigger, which would stop them from searching up or like cascading into a Living End, a little bit more mana efficient. Or we can counterspell. I choose to counterspell. Take the Shardless Agent so they can't have Force. Choose to counterspell because they already have 2 Living Ends in their hand. So if they're only on 3 Living Ends in their deck, then they would end up cascading into the third one. I get to counterspell that, and they would be out of Living Ends. From what I've seen, it's like 50-50 as to whether people are playing 3 or 4 copies of Living End. But I'm assuming my opponent scooping here means that they're only on 3. If they were on 4, just for reference point, if they were on 4, then the correct play for them would be to Violent Outburst on their own upkeep so that they don't accidentally draw into the 4th. Because it could have been they're on 4 and just accidentally drew into the 4th, but the odds are fairly low. Either way, on to game 3. Reasonable opener. We've got some cantrips. We got some cards to cast, blah, blah, blah. We decide to put the island on top, the second stub below the island, mostly to hide it, to kind of protect it, legacy style with Brainstorm. Just, hey, if my opponent doesn't know about this thing, then they're less likely to play around it. So we see them deciding to cycle here instead of going for like a Living End because they know about stub, but they don't know about second stub. It's like hobbits. Like they know about breakfast. Yes. They know about second breakfast. Do they know about lunch, dinner, supper, elevensies? See what we did there? It's kind of nerdy. I appreciated it. Either way, opponent's going to go for a Shardless Agent. We are going... I should have considered first, just on the off chance that I hit like a Drown in the Lock or a Counterspell. I could have been a little more efficient there, but more than likely I wanted to use out the stubs anyway. So if I considered into an actual Counterspell like Drown, then I could have it if I don't find a ferocious threat. Like the stubs are only live after this turn if I find a ferocious threat, but an actual Counterspell or Drown in the Lock is going to be live kind of regardless. Dress down on their second main phase. Do not wait until they're in step because I want this Murktide to enter with counters. Play out the Murktide, hold up Otawara, or hold up Counterspell and Drown in the Lock. I know my opponent's got an Overgrown Tomb in hand as one of their unknown cards, or one of their cards. So again, keeping up with the lands that my opponent has available is extremely important. They go off of a Living End to grief me. And at this point, we know we've got the game because we could counterspell the grief. We know their last card is an Overgrown Tomb. I could counterspell the grief and untap, but I decided to just let the grief resolve because it doesn't matter. Either way, I'm going to untap and either Drown in the Lock the Curator or Otawara to bounce it, in which case I get to attack through with the Murktide plus one of my guys on the ground, and they're at 9 life. So either one's fine. Grief doesn't matter. Just kill that into turn, untap, swing in for lethal. And on to match number 3? 4? 4. Yeah. Tron, Superfriends, Living End. Yeah, match number 4. Opponent leading off with the Misty Rainforest makes me assume another Living End. All over the place right now. Nope, not Living End. Can't Living End into a counter spell. So double counter spell, Tishana's Tidebinder, Lightning Bolt. Take one of the counter spells. We've got Murktide to get down pretty quickly. Opponent missing the land drop, which means like Murktide plus Soft Stub might let us just play down through counterspell. Lightning Bolt's going to have a difficult time killing our Murktide. And we find the extra land, so now we can absolutely Murktide plus Stub the counterspell. Could have been more mana efficient to Murktide plus counter, but I kind of wanted to keep the counterspell for the Tidebinder just in case. An opponent not finding another red source means they can't double bolt our Murktide right away. Them going bolt to my face makes me assume that they drew a second copy of Lightning Bolt. Tidebinder ping. Tidebinder, or not Tidebinder, Bowmaster ping. Bowmaster get Fatal Push. Token get Fatal Push. Opponent scoops it up. We say, cool, on to game 2. So it looks like some sort of Grixis control. Sideboarding against them. Just like trimming on some Thoughtseizes because they're a Bolt deck. Probably like Bolt, Snap Bolt. Ended up cutting the Bitter Reunion. Just didn't want to discard cards. Didn't want to pay life. Sided in Flusterstorm, sided in the 2 Stern Scoldings because it hits Tishana's Tidebinder, Bowmaster, Snapcaster. Usually all these Grixis decks are like Flame of Anor style decks, things like that. So that's at least the immediate assumption. So they're hitting land drops. We're not casting Bowmaster. I could have, but I didn't want them to Bowmaster my Bowmaster, so I figured I'd wait and see if they Bowmastered first. And then if they don't do anything, now I can kind of consider if they Bowmaster in response to my consider, I can Bowmaster their Bowmaster. If they counterspell my Bowmaster, untap and Bowmaster, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. So we will try to Bowmaster their Charm. They've got Stern Scolding. So as far as like the card advantage or card attrition battle goes, we're doing fine. Especially when opponent One Rings, Pithing Needles my One Rings. Joke's on you, I don't have the One Ring. So I guess they think that we are just a blue-black control shell. Which makes sense, because they only saw Murktide game 1. Now that we found a Shadow that can potentially get Stubborn Denial online. I probably should have boarded out a Fatal Push or 2. I don't really know what I would have brought in over it, but seems like I've got a little backup of removal spells. I was kind of expecting like Shieldred or something like that. Shieldred, Tidebinder, Snapcaster. Either way, we're going to play a Shadow, and we're going to back it up with a whole mess of counter spells and interaction. So, opponent, good luck. Take a draw, pass the turn. And yes, I am very willing. So they scoop it up here. I'm very willing, if need be, to like fatal push my token, hold priority, fatal push, hold priority, dismember, to turn on like a really big fluster storm. Thankfully, we didn't need to. Just get to go to match 5. Keep a 3-lander with Bowmaster, Drown, Tidebinder. I decided to keep the 3rd land over the Bowmaster because the second copy is going to be a little redundant in a lot of matchups, and it's not really like swinging the tides of battle. But it looks like we're just up against Scam. Thoughtseize, really great pickup off the top there. Lets us know that they don't have an Undying effect, so we could potentially Drown in the Lock. Also tells us that they top decked this Ragavan. Rude. So they've got a Lightning Bolt, another land. We'll just pass back, plan on Bowmaster, the Ragavan. If they dash, take the 3 off the Dolphy. Get some of those cards out of the way. So they've got Lightning Bolt and an Unknown. We'll go ahead and take the chance, see if they've got an Undying effect. They don't. They fetch the 5 cards in the yard, so now we know this Drown in the Lock can hit anything in their deck, including a hard cast Grief. But it could hit a Fury, could hit a Grief, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, anything like that. We'll swing in. If they dash a Ragavan, they can bolt the Tidebinder, but we'll take the chance. Thoughtseize is going to eat our stub, but we do have them down to just bolt. We have a pretty good clock. So if they want to spend the bolt on the Tidebinder, that's fine. That protects our life total a little bit more. If they want to like save the bolt to try to double bolt us, that's fine. Even more fine because we have a Shadow. And now Shadow can't be Furied. It can't be... it can be terminated, but terminate also means they're not killing anything else on our board. And Counterspell is about the best draw we could ask for. So now we force the block on the Grief. Opponent is, I guess, still living in a world where they believe they're going to be able to double bolt us out. Nope. And on to game 2. Sideboarding and Scam. On the draw, I'm usually trimming a couple Thoughtseize, 2 or 3. On the play, I'll likely keep them in. But on the draw, I find myself gravitating more towards just trying to keep removal heavy hands. And Thoughtseize doesn't really play into that too well. So, turn 1, consider, find a Bitter Triumph. So now we have an answer to the Grief as long as they don't have an Undying effect. Rip the second land off the top. Super, super lucky for us. So we're going to go for the Bitter Triumph on their upkeep. If they have the Undying effect, I can't really do much about it. But like in this case, they don't have the Undying effect. So we get the Grief off the board. They dash a Ragavan into one of our dead counter spells. And now we just hang out with our Drown in the Locks for a Grief. Or not for a Grief, for a Ragavan. Opponent decides that Ragavan is too good. They save it for after our Drown in the Lock. Undying it. Cool. So, I did have a bit of a decision the last turn. I could have played out the Shadow and just planned on trying to dodge a removal spell. Like, if they had a Terminate, then they kill me on the spot. But if they don't have a Terminate, then I have a Shadow down that just dodges, like, everything. I elect to pass with the Drown in the Lock instead because I could maybe take a hit off the Ragavan. I don't want to, but the Drown in the Lock would just like stop things from getting worse. But I elected to kill the Ragavan. They had the Undying effect. I kind of figured like it's a bit of a push. The situation doesn't really change if I Drown in the Loch versus Play Out the Shadow, unless they have, I think, exactly Dolphy. But since they didn't, and they don't have a removal spell for the Shadow, same thing happened this turn. I could have held up Tidebinder and like attacked him with the Shadow. They don't block. I pass. They Tidebinder back. I know their last card in hand is a Fury. So I could have Tidebindered back to trade off with the Ragavan. And then if they have Fury, like land Fury, then they have to chump the Shadow. But if they have a Bolt, I'm dead. I can't beat Bolt anyway. But if they have Terminate, then they kill the Tidebinder. And they're able to attack him with a lethal Ragavan. So I opted to preordain because if I whiff, I can still just like play the Shadow. Maybe I find a counter, or I can still sit back on the Shadow. Maybe I find a counter spell or something and plan on dashing into Shauna's next turn or flashing into Shauna's next turn. But preordain found me a Bowmaster, and that's like the best thing I could ask for because that doesn't lose to Terminate, blocks the Ragavan. It doesn't really change anything with the Fury, which I still know is their last card. So Dismember is a fantastic pickup. I can trade off with this Grief, and if they cast a Fury, kill it. If they go for the Undying effect on the Grief like this, I've got Dismember. They can't Fury. If they pre-combat land Fury my board, then I get to Dismember the Grief, untap, force the chump with the Shadow, get like my next draw step, and just put them on straight Abyss mode. So thankfully it worked out pretty well there. Let's go back to the list. What would I change? What would I keep the same? Not having the Street Wraiths felt a little awkward because like in those matchups against decks like Tron, Amulet Titan, Living In, you really want those Shadows online. And I did feel like there were several times over the course of this league that I didn't have Shadow online, and it was very noticeable. Now, I did have slightly more consistent Murktides. It was like the first matchup against Living In that I didn't, but the Considers and the Preordains did help with the Murktide. But like I said, it did make Shadow noticeably worse. So that's kind of the trade-off that you're asking for there. Might consider going up to like a third Dismember over the third Fatal Push if no Shadows, but not really positive what kind of numbers I want there. Tidebinder was really good. I've seen some people going up to the third copy of that. I don't think it's a card I want 3 of. I've seen some run the third in the sideboard. I can't really think of that many matchups that I like want to board in a third Tidebinder. So I think if you're really wanting 3, I would just run all 3 in the main. If you're on 2 and you're hesitant, I can't think of a lot of reasons to go up to 3. Like Tidebinder as an answer is pretty clunky. 3 mana to stop like an ability, usually stifle a fetch land or something like that, is getting pretty clunky. But Tidebinder as a 3 mana card that I think can get some sort of value in just about every matchup is pretty cool. It's not always going to be the best value, but value is value. Out of the sideboard, Spreading Seas, I did see Tron, so I don't want to say there was like a bad number of Spreading Seas matchups, but I think you're going to win or lose against Tron more often than not based off your ability to get down to threat. So I think Street Wraith would help more than like Spreading Seas would. Stern Scolding was fine. Stub was fine. I didn't see Hardened Scales or like Yawgmoth, so Dress Down didn't look as good. I think the only Saga deck we saw was Tron, much as that's a Saga deck. The extra Bitter Triumph in the sideboard, I'm kind of questioning. Like, The pay 3 life off Triumph when you've got Shadow is nice, but you're not always going to have Shadow. And the discard a card you like never want to do. So I'm still iffy on Triumph. But like Planeswalkers are something that this deck struggles with, so I understand where people have gotten on the bitter Triumph train. But we'll keep messing around with it. Like Curse Totem looked cool. I know we only saw it against Sylvan Caryatid, but still, that's the kind of card that I think could help us really handily against decks like Yawgmoth and Hardened Scales. So that's probably a piece of tech that I'll keep trying pretty aggressively, see if it has some play to it or if it feels kind of awkward. But other than that, hope this video helps you make some of the decisions you're thinking about in your Dimir Shadow list. Otherwise, have a link down below for the Twitch in case you want to come check out a live stream, Twitter, Discord, come say hey, come talk shop about Shadow. I know a lot of people are really hyped right now because they just had a big stream from Wizards this morning, the morning of recording this, about potential ban update coming like December 5th, and people talking about Fury being on the hit list. So if you want to come talk about that, love to hear your thoughts and opinions, what is going to change in the format going forward, what we need to do to adjust to it. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to that. Otherwise, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.